It's January 11th and 4:30. Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call?
Councilmember Kilby?
Here.
Councilmember Martinez Bravo? Here. Councilmember Tennyson?
Present.
Vice Mayor Tremblay? Here. And Mayor Santangelo?
Here. Thank you. The purpose for us having this meeting at this time is to go into closed session, so I will ask our city attorney to read the closed session item.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have on the agenda one item. It's conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, and we're going into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2, and there is one potential case to be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, and with that, we will recess to closed session.
All right, I'd like to call the regular Camarillo Sanitary District meeting for January 11th to order, please. Could we get a roll call, please?
Director Santangelo,
Here.
Director Tennyson,
Present.
Director Tremblay, Secretary Martinez Bravo, and Chair Kildee.
Thank you. Mr. Tennyson, would you kindly lead us in a flag salute, please?
Please place your hands over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we've got the approval of the agenda with no changes. This gets down to public comments. It's public comments for the Camarillo Sanitary District. Is there any public that would like to make a comment at this point? Seeing no one come forward, I'm going to come down to the consent items. That's items A and B on the consent.
Move consent.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. That passes 5-0. All right. That gets us down to discussion items. We don't have any discussion items tonight on this particular agenda. However, let's talk oral communications. Any oral communications tonight from anyone? Not hearing any. With that, we'll adjourn this meeting.
And I will call to order this meeting of the successor agency, and let the record reflect that all members are present. Approval of agenda, any changes? I will move on. Are there any public comments? Seeing none, I'll move on to the consent calendar.
I'll move the approval of the consent calendar.
Have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I have to abstain from the item A.
Okay,
And I will be abstaining as well.
okay. Please vote.
What item was that? Item A, was it?
The consent.
Consent. Oh, got it, okay. Okay.
Vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
And that passes unanimously. Are there any discussion items? Oral comments? Okay, with that, I will adjourn. And that brings us to reopening the Camarillo City Council meeting. Let the record reflect that all council members are still present. And we'll move to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay. We're going to move oral communications to the end of the agenda, like we usually do. And then we'll move on to the consent calendar. Are there any changes to the consent agenda? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And consent passes unanimously. I just want to make a comment that seated at the dais is our new city attorney. Welcome. That was in our consent agenda. I believe it was item H. So introducing Rachel Richmond, thank you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council.
Madam
And
Mayor, if I could make a quick comment, I'd just like to congratulate Rob Davidson, who's in the audience, and he's my nominee for the Planning Commission. Congratulations, Rob.
welcome aboard. I was also going to comment on that. I wanted to thank our outgoing planning commissioners, Luis Espinoza and Jean Talmadge. They served our community really well, and we appreciate their service. And so welcome aboard, Rob, and Gladys Limon, who I don't think is here, correct? Right? So welcome aboard. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item L, which is a discussion item, and I believe we have Alonso Ramirez to give us a report.
We're good? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council members. So today I'm gonna do a brief presentation on a letter of interest and a Home Key 3.0. Hi, Christy. There you go. Thank you. Home Key funding is provided by the state of California for the purpose of rapidly expanding the inventory of housing available to persons currently experiencing homelessness or person at risk of homelessness. The previous round of funding, round number 2, was released on September 9, 2021, and it provided nearly $1.5 billion. 1.2 was derived from the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund, established by the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, and $250 million was provided by the State General Fund. The County of Ventura expects round 3 to be released in the spring of 2023. This will be the last round of Home Key unless additional funding is allocated by the state. County staff reached out to jurisdictions and organizations in the region to inquire as to potential interest in partnering with the county as co-applicants for a Home Key application. The County of Ventura is requiring that any organization seeking their partnership for a Home Key grant application submits a letter of interest, or LOI, for review by the Ventura County Board of Supervisors. Additionally, the County of Ventura has allocated a portion of their own ARPA money, that's again the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. They've allocated their own funding to be potentially used as a match for projects in the region, and will use the letter of interest submitted by cities and organizations to identify how much funding is needed. To access this additional resource, the City of Camarillo needs to submit an LOI, which is due tomorrow, January 12, 2023. So submitting a letter of interest is consistent with 2 actions recently taken by City Council. In September 2022, the city joined the Continuum of Care Alliance of Ventura County. In the Memorandum of Understanding entered into by all cities in the county, the City of Camarillo committed to strategize for solutions to address homelessness which has a wide impact across the region. The second action taken was in October 2022 when the City Council approved the update of the 2021-2029 housing element. The housing element included program number 17, the Homeless Strategic Plan, which commits the city to develop solutions to address the increase of homelessness in Camarillo. According to Program 17, the city must establish this plan by December 2025, identifying resources and potential locations to develop the necessary housing for individuals experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. Additionally, the city must also coordinate with local and regional organizations who can assist in providing temporary, permanent, and emergency shelter. Now, on December 8, 2022, the County of Ventura released a request for letters of interest from qualified partners to collaborate with the county to apply for a Home Key program funds to acquire, develop, and own and manage 1 or more properties to provide permanent or transitional housing for persons already experiencing or at risk of homelessness. As I mentioned, the county will use the letter to determine what level of commitment is required by the partners in terms of manpower and financial need. And the request of letters of interest will be evaluated by a committee of regional subject matter experts comprised of 1 representative from each city, representatives from the county, the continuum of care, and the nonprofit sector. So I'm going to briefly walk you through just a high level of the letter of interest. First, we have the description of the project. So if available, responders are required to provide a description of the project, including the site where the project would be located, as well as the status of site control. At this time, no site has been identified. The city is working on contracting with a developer/operator who will also serve as a third co-applicant of the Home Key application. So it will be the county, the city, and the developer or operator. This developer will help identify, acquire, rehabilitate, and operate the site. City staff has informed the county that once the developer is on board and able to help identify and conduct the necessary physical needs assessment, the site will then be confirmed. Next is on bullet point number 2 is the vision statement, which requires the city to identify what kind of housing it seeks to build through home key funding. Currently, staff is recommending permanent supportive housing that would also include a navigational center with emergency beds in order to be able to provide the necessary support to the unhoused individuals and families here in Camarillo, while also adhering to all legal requirements when enforcing a city's code. Bullet point number 3 is the financial analysis. Similar to the description of the site, the city is waiting to bring on board a developer and operator to provide an accurate financial analysis to the county. This analysis will consist of the development budget, proposed operating budget, expenditures and revenues, and sources of funding. So this will be made available to the City Council as soon as it's finalized. Bullet point number 4, extent of assistance from the county. We will be requesting the county to be a co-applicant in our home key application. Essentially, Camarillo application, as I mentioned, will have 3 co-applicants, the city, the county, and the developer. And if available, the city will also be looking to access some additional county supportive services, and the ARPA funding that I mentioned will be available as a cash match from the county as well. Lastly, bullet point number 5 is the county is asking the city to try to anticipate some of the biggest challenges that we will face during this process. The primary challenge is going to be time. It is expected that home key funding will be awarded on the first-come, first-served basis to applicants who meet the requirements. All applicants will have to work very quickly to provide a successful application to the state before all funds are committed. If awarded, and if the requirements of home key remain the same, the developer will have 12 months to rehabilitate the site, a very quick turnaround. We're relying on the expertise of the county, as they have worked on home key projects in the previous 2 rounds, as well as searching for an experienced developer to help us get through the finish line with a successful project. So staff is requesting the council authorize the city manager to submit a letter of interest to the County of Ventura to collaborate on a home key application. This concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you so much, Alfonso. Do we have questions? Okay, no questions. Do we have any public comment? No public comment. Okay,
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment when it's appropriate.
go right ahead.
Yeah, my thinking is this is an opportunity that may or may not ever present itself again. And I think this is something that we need to move forward with, and I'm ready to make a motion when it's appropriate.
Any other comments? I will make one.
Okay, so with that, I'll make a motion that we approve the suggested action.
Who was first?
I think Ty goes to the right.
Okay.
Tina got it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I do just want to make a quick comment that this is really a huge opportunity for us. I mean, this is money. And I did just read that the governor was following through with his plans for $1 billion. And with it being on a first-come, first-served basis, we really should act. We have a homeless problem in Camarillo because one homeless person is the same as 50 or 100. And so we need to come up with solutions, and this is a really huge opportunity for us, so I'm in favor of this as well. And with that, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. Okay, moving us on to our public hearing. This is item M, the zoning ordinance amendments to the Camarillo Municipal Code. And I believe Joe Vaca will be presenting this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Santangelo. So for background for the City Council, we started working on a zoning ordinance amendment to update the Camarillo Municipal Code to address exterior lighting. Our code does not currently have lighting regulations in our rural exclusive residential zone, nor in our single-family residential zone, which makes it very challenging for staff to work towards addressing any nuisances that come from glare or light trespass in these zones. So we definitely needed to update that. Also, our current requirements of our parking ordinance regulate the maximum height of light poles to 20 feet. And this does not allow for flexibility to have taller light poles on larger commercial or industrial properties, which if we were to allow larger or taller light poles on larger properties, it creates greater opportunities for the planting of shade trees and can have more efficient lighting systems. So we wanted to update that as well, which is consistent with how current retailers of those larger sites would like to proceed with lighting. And then we also wanted to update the lighting regulations to put them into one comprehensive chapter of the municipal code, which would be applicable in all zones throughout the city except for the public right-of-way. And having it in one unified chapter of the code is easier for staff to administer, and it's also much easier for the public and the developers when they're trying to find our regulations because it's all in one spot. So we worked on updating the municipal code and thought that it'd be very good to create a graphic that staff can use and that would be user-friendly for the development community and the public to demonstrate the type of lighting fixtures that are appropriate and acceptable to the city of Camarillo in collaboration with our general plan design guidelines and the ordinance regulations that we drafted. So we created a lighting fixture guide. So for background on our public review process to date, it started in September on the 16th in 2022 when we presented the zoning ordinance amendment initiation process to the Economic Development Land Use Committee and recommended that we needed to proceed on a lighting ordinance. And we received concurrence from the committee to work forward in creating an ordinance. So on September 28th, we contracted with Michael Baker International Consulting and brought on two excellent professionals in the industry, Serbi Barbaya, who is an AICP lead urban planner who helped us with creating the graphic for the lighting fixture guide, and Eric Yamashiro, who's also here with us tonight and will be presenting in a few minutes here. He's a professional engineer and a lighting technical manager, design expert in the industry of lighting. And so they've been very helpful in collaborating with me in crafting the ordinance and the lighting regulations. On December 2nd, our lighting ordinance was presented to the Ventura County Transportation Commission, Airport Land Use Commission for a review of a finding of consistency. And they did make a unanimous determination that our lighting ordinance was consistent with the airport land use compatibility plan. And as part of that, we included some updates to the committee that we had been collaborating with our local Camarillo Airport personnel and also VCTC staff, and included some exemptions in the ordinance appropriate for FAA regulations for the airport. The next step was to present this at a public hearing to our Planning Commission, which occurred on December 6th, 2022, and they ultimately recommended approval, and I'll share with you some details about that towards the end of our presentation. And then that brings us to tonight, which will hopefully be the culmination of a lot of hard work and a lot of iterations leading to what we think is a very strong lighting regulations ordinance that will be good for the city of Camarillo. So with that, I'd like to again introduce Mr. Yamashiro, who's going to present a very general overview of the lighting regulations ordinance that we crafted together. And then I'll turn it back over to me.
Thanks, Joe. As you said, my name is Eric Yamashiro. I'm an electrical engineer and the lighting technical manager for Michael Baker International. Have about 12 years of industry experience doing lighting design for various commercial and residential federal projects throughout the country. So we're going to do a very high-level summary of what we have in this ordinance and excuse me, and so what we're going to start with is where does this ordinance apply? And really where it's going to apply is everywhere, all zones except for the public right-of-way. And it's going to apply and it's going to apply, but it's not going to override or take place of the state requirements or California Green Building Standard codes or the California Green Energy Code. So this will be, those requirements will still take effect for all lighting installations. And where this is really going with this ordinance and where we're really focusing is on reducing the what is considered nuisance lighting, which is flashing, alternating, blinking lights that aren't supposed to be doing that, and any lights that provide glare or spillover light into adjacent properties. There we go. So a question that you'll probably hear a lot is when does somebody have to submit a plan to get their installation improved. And under this ordinance, it will be required for all commercial, industrial, really any non-single-family residential projects will have to submit lighting plans for their exterior installations. And those plans will have to show conformance with various requirements, such as what we're introducing is a cap on color temperature for both commercial and residential properties. And then also, as Joe mentioned, an adjustment to the max pole mounting heights, where we are now going to allow up to 35-foot mounting heights in lots over 20 acres if they have a reviewed and approved plan development permit. And then and we also want to allow for the existing City of Camarillo Community Design Element General Plan to still carry some weight and encourage the beautiful decorative full cut and cutoff lighting that is already existing around here in Camarillo. And this also includes that lighting fixture guide that Joe mentioned as well, where we'll have some visuals to help guide the general public and any contractors or developers in fixture selection. There we go. Some other requirements in here, certification and testing, making sure that everything is done by a professional engineer, a certified engineer with the California stamp. Exemptions, navigation beacons, traffic signals, anything that is required for safety of the public. As Joe mentioned, he did reach out to the airport to make sure that this jives with their plan moving forward as well, and we got their approval there. And then two sections that were not existing in the current CMC, which is the violation penalties and non-conforming systems. And then here we have the lighting fixture guide. So as you can see, we've broken it up into 3 different categories. We have preferred fixtures, which are decorative cutoff fixtures, acceptable, which are cut off, but maybe a little bit more, not as aesthetically pleasing, but still great in our mind. And then prohibited, which are unshielded, really the main proponents for glare that you see today in some installations. And then at the very top, we also have a color temperature scale for a visual for those who aren't familiar with what color temperature is in lighting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yamashiro. Appreciate that. Now I'm going to go over some of the updates that were posted to PrimeGov yesterday. And staff was collaborating on some final tweaks to the ordinance to make it as defensible as possible. And so we felt that there were some improvements that we could make, and so we included those in the agenda packet. And I want to just give a quick overview in 3 slides of those updates in case the public hasn't seen those and want to make sure the council is aware of what's been updated. So first, we edited a sentence in the general findings. We added 3 definitions. First, lighting system means a luminaire has installed. Light trespass, which is similar to glare and spillover, but we defined it to mean light emitted by a lighting system which causes glare, spillover, or otherwise shines beyond the boundaries of the property or property lines on which the lighting system is installed, or is found to create a nuisance to abutting residences, adjacent open space areas, or upon the public right-of-way. And then we also included the definition of our residential zones, which you can see on the slide, includes our zoning districts for residential uses. We also added item F to general requirements to indicate lighting systems in every zone must, as a performance standard, be directed, oriented, and shielded to prevent light trespass, and must comply with all requirements set forth in this ordinance. So that was additional clarification that we felt was important. We also addressed some clarification by using the word property instead of site, area, or project. And then we further clarified by using the words plan development permit to further define a project, because a plan development permit is a term that's already defined in our municipal code. And then last but not least, of course, we updated the non-conforming systems section. Essentially, we made it clear that the community development director has the authority to determine that a non-conforming lighting system in any zone that results in light trespass must be corrected. And that correction could occur through either shielding, having the lighting redirected, filtered, replaced with a less intense light source, removed, or a combination thereof to eliminate light trespass. So we felt that all these updates were important, and so we included those in the latest draft ordinance, and those were the highlights. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission considered this regulation on the meeting on December 6th. And with the zoning ordinance amendment that was reviewed at the time, the Planning Commission did support a recommendation of approval after the public hearing to the City Council. We had one verbal comment card and speaker at the meeting in support of the ordinance. And that commenter also requested that the maximum Kelvin in residential zones be limited to 3,000 degrees. At the time, the ordinance limited Kelvin to 4,000 degrees citywide. And so we included that in the proposed ordinance, and that's what's in the current draft. And the Planning Commission supported that. We also received a written verbal comment card from Kendall Lucene, who's the Community Plans and Liaison Officer with Naval Base Ventura County. And they used military speak to support the ordinance by stating that the ordinance will not impact military operations. And ultimately, the Planning Commission adopted a resolution recommending approval to the City Council of the zoning ordinance amendment, and they recommended approval that the City Council adopt the Camarillo lighting fixture guide that's presented to you this evening. So with that, our suggested action is that you make a finding as part of the approval process that's recommended on the ordinance and light fixture guide that they are exempt from California Environmental Quality Act, specifically under sections 15061B3, which is the general rule of common sense exemption, and section 15308, which further states that this is actually protecting our natural environment, and that you request a reading of the title of the ordinance, and that you waive further reading and introduce an ordinance to amend the municipal code to indicate that exterior lighting will be permitted subject to the updated Chapter 1947 Lighting Regulations Ordinance that's applicable in all zones in the city, and that you adopt a resolution approving the City of Camarillo Lighting Fixture Guide. That concludes our presentation, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you both very much. Do we have any questions for staff?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Joe, first of all, thanks for an excellent presentation. Thank you for working on this ordinance. Thank you to our consultants for doing this. This is a real step up, an upgrade for the city. I just want to make sure I understand from a residential zone standpoint. I'm fully in support of the ordinance as presented, including the revisions. I just want to make sure, under section 19.47.060 under plans required, those exclude out non-single family residences, but it then comes back and includes, it then comes back at a later point in the ordinance and includes those single-family residences, for example, within the rural exclusive area and within the single-family residential zone, because even though, if I'm understanding correctly, and I want to confirm with you, even though no plans have been approved, the ordinance sets a specific performance standard that the installation of the luminaire cannot cause light trespass, and that's what I'm reading in 19.47.04F, and then in 19.47110A, the last sentence, the non-conforming systems. Is my understanding correct?
Yes.
With regard to the full applicability of this ordinance and the Director of Community Development's enforcement relative to single-family residential properties and rural exclusive properties?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, Joe, as long as, we're talking here before we open the public hearing, and maybe this question would be more appropriate after the public hearing, but how will we enforce this if we get into a situation that somebody puts up light without going through the permitting process? And if that's the case, has that been an issue in the past, and do you foresee that potentially being an issue in the future?
So light trespass has been an issue in the past, but we haven't had the ability to address it in the rural exclusive residential zone or in the R1 single-family residential zones because we didn't have any lighting regulations. Mm-hmm. So with this proposed ordinance, we will have tools to address light trespass. and specifically under 19.47.100 violations penalties. There's a section B that states that under my authority or a designee of community development director, we can require a property owner to address nuisance lighting by creating a plan to address it. Of course, they can just turn the lights off. They can replace it on their own, of their own volition. But if they do those things and it doesn't work and we still have a problem, in our ordinance, we would require that they do provide a plan that's created by a professional lighting engineer to reduce the nuisance to an acceptable level under the authority of our review. So this gives us the tools to address nuisance lighting should that occur that we don't currently have.
And to follow that up, Joe, as these lights get better and better quality, and typically brighter and brighter, if you will, does this ordinance also give us an opportunity to address that if they're not doing what specifically they're meant to do following this ordinance?
Yes, it does. We did put a maximum 3,000 Kelvin in our residential zones. And if there's a light that's 5,000 Kelvin and it's creating a nuisance, we can address that.
And then my last question, the 35-foot, would that be used sparingly? I would think that that
Yes.
would not be
Yes, it
something
would.
that would happen very often.
That's correct. And what really limits that is the cap that we placed in terms of the acreage of the properties where that would be allowed. So first of all, the properties where that would be allowed have to be 20 acres or more in size. And so a property of that size probably should have taller light poles for energy efficiency and to create greater opportunities for landscaping. And so we will only have that on larger properties, and we don't have that many larger properties in the city. So I don't foresee that being a significant issue. And keep in mind, they don't have to go to 35 feet. It's that they're allowed to go to 35 feet as part of their plan development review process and approval.
That's all I have, Your Honor, at this point.
Are there any other questions?
I had a question, and thank you also for your presentation. Shall a correction need to be made? What does that process look like and the time, the time frame of that?
So for the sake of discussion, let's say a year from now, we realize that there's something lacking in the ordinance that we crafted, and we need to make an update. It would be a similar time frame that I showed you where it starts with the Economic Development Land Use Committee. So that was in September, and now we're here to the City Council for an ultimate decision here in January. And that was somewhat accelerated, quite honestly. Most zoning ordinance amendments typically take a little bit longer. So usually it's about 4 to 6 months to get all the way through the process for an adoption. But we've been very careful here, and we did a lot of analysis, and we read all of the ordinances of all the cities and municipalities in Ventura County, as well as several other cities in Southern California. And we even looked at ordinances in Scottsdale and some in Salt Lake City and some dark sky ordinances also. So we cherry-picked the best of the best, and it's included in this ordinance. So we're pretty confident in this ordinance. We think it's going to be all-inclusive. But you're right, that something could come up a year from now that we didn't anticipate, and we'll deal with it if that happens.
Are there any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing, so I will open the public hearing. If you would like to speak on this item, now is the time to do so. And I do have one speaker card from Neil Dixon. And I know you've spoken before and you know the rules, correct?
I do know the rules,
Okay.
yes. Mayor Santangelo, members of the City Council, thank you for this opportunity. I'm here to express my appreciation and support for this ordinance. This has been sort of a personal issue for me for over the past more than a year now with having lived in a neighborhood or living in a neighborhood that has no lighting ordinance. And with the city unable to do anything to address light trespass problems, and we have a serious problem with our neighbor who's been remarkably uncooperative. So I'm very grateful to Mr. Vaca with the amount of time he spent on this and the detail. As having an interest in this over the past year and a half, I've spent a lot of time personally researching lighting ordinances and reading about lighting issues, and have learned more about lighting than I ever thought I would, or that I ever thought I would be interested in. And it turns out it's a very fascinating subject, and if anybody wants to talk about it, I'd be glad to. But the lighting this turns out this is a bigger issue than just the annoyance of having somebody shining a light in your window. This is an emerging science of excess nighttime lighting. It's an environmental issue. It's a healthcare issue. It's a big problem. This is a really well-crafted ordinance, and I appreciate the efforts that were put into it. And I think this goes a long way in addressing some of those issues. But I think it's something that the public's going to be hearing more about and having to deal with more in the future. And with that, I again appreciate your time and appreciate the hard work that Mr. Fox has put into this. Thank you.
Mayor, I have a question for Dr. Dixon. Can you ask him a question? Dr. Dixon, thanks for your interest in this and your support on this. But I just wanted to take a minute, particularly given your professional background. I'm interested in this, particularly from both an environmental standpoint and from a health standpoint. But could you just reflect briefly for us the importance of this relative to the American Medical Association guidelines on this? And particularly, I know that you appeared in front of the Planning Commission and advocated for a 3,000 Kelvin standard to replace the 4,000 Kelvin standard initially adopted. And that was what you asked for, was completely consistent with the AMA's recommendation. But could you just reflect for council for just a minute on the importance of this from a health standpoint and a sleep science standpoint?
Yes, in 2016, the American Medical Association came out with recommended standards for outdoor lighting, which seems like an unusual place for the American Medical Association to be, but it just highlights the fact that it is more than just an annoyance. It's a healthcare issue. I don't want to take too much time, but to understand lighting, just to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. Kelvin is a measurement of the color of light. Light is measured in both lumens, which measure the amount of light, and Kelvin, which measures the heat, essentially the brightness of the temperature of the light. Light that is in the blue, and light is, of course, the light we see is white light is a combination of all of the colors of the visible light spectrum that combine to give us this white color. But within that white light is is blue light, which probably everybody's heard about. There's adverse health effects related to blue light. That's what gives LED lights in particular that intense white brightness. As you go to the opposite side of the light spectrum, it's more into the red and amber colors. And the American Medical Association has recommended the exterior lighting be limited to this 3,000 Kelvin, because as you get to 4,000, 5,000 Kelvin, the brightness of that light has a number of adverse effects, again, both environmentally but also on human beings. It has a higher content of the blue light, which is high frequency, lower amplitude light, which actually has adverse effects on your eye at nighttime. And everybody who's driven down the street and had a car coming at them with high intensity lights and can probably easily understand how those intense bright lights actually impair your vision rather than improve your vision. And it's because that low amplitude light gets in through your iris and affects the retina much more intensely than larger amplitude light does. So it's associated with increased automobile accidents, animals being frozen on the highway because they're completely blinded by lights. Excessive exposure to these high-intensity blue light is also associated with increased risk of a number of health issues, breast cancer, insomnia, type 2 diabetes, obesity, sleep apnea. There's a number of health issues that are associated with excessive exposure to blue light, which is in that high Kelvin spectrum, the 4,000, 5,000 spectrum. So I hope I didn't bore you to death with that.
No, may I ask one follow-up? No, Dr. Dixon, you didn't bore me at all. In fact, I really appreciate the amount of time and research that you've put into this. I'm given to understand also, and this is one of the reasons I'm fully in support of it, I'll speak to that later, but from an environmental standpoint, this is also critically important, both with respect to impacts on wildlife and nocturnal wildlife, and also with respect to the impacts on carbon-producing energy in terms of what. Can you speak to that? Are you familiar with that side of it?
Yes.
From an environmental standpoint?
Yes. Again, I'm not an expert in these areas, but I've read a lot about it. And there are two environmental impacts, and you've mentioned them both. One is the carbon footprint, and the city has done a phenomenal job in trying to reduce its carbon footprint. I look at, one of the things that's not included in this ordinance and that I would have liked to seen, but I understand why it's not included, is a time period of the day when maybe lights would not be on. Lights that are purely decorative in nature would not be on. Lights that are illuminating a palm tree in the middle of the night. That nighttime energy is mostly carbon-based production. There's no solar energy produced at night. So if you don't have battery power, maybe you have wind power. But for the most part, there's more carbon produced by nighttime energy use than there is by daytime energy use. So to me, illuminating your palm tree in the middle of the night is a complete waste of energy and bad for the environment. It's a small amount of energy and maybe a tiny grain of sand, but we all know the story of grains of sand. The issue is as far as affecting wildlife. One of the most interesting stories is, you might want to look this up, but when the Twin Towers fell, they were placed by essentially a light monument that comes on at night, two intensely bright lights that shine into the sky in New York City, and it's a beautiful monument and tribute to the people who died. But the unexpected, unintended adverse effect is that migratory birds that fly through there from hundreds of miles away would see those lights and be distracted off of their course, and they would fly into those beams of light, many of them getting confused and dying and crashing into buildings. And it became such an intense issue that the city of New York now has people who monitor and count the birds that fly into those lights at night. And when that count reaches over 1,000 birds, they turn the lights off for 20 minutes and then turn them back on. And it's that kind of thing. If you read through it, you'll find situations like that, bridges that are beautifully lighted that impair the migratory salmon as they get confused in their course and go the wrong direction and don't spawn. Bats depend on darkness so that they can find the insects that they want to eat. Owls, depend on being able to see better than their prey at night. But when there's light, their vision is impaired, and their prey is an advantage. So there's this. I could go on and on and on. There's a list. There's a snake that is now a nocturnal snake that used to live in Orange County that's now extinct because there's the intensity of light in the area doesn't allow it to capture its prey. So again, more information than you want, but that's what I mean. This is a much bigger issue than just I'm bothered by my neighbor's lights shining in my window, which I am. But so. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You can come back every 2 weeks for a science lesson. Okay, if nobody else would like to speak, I will close the public hearing. Is there any discussion?
I don't have any. I'll recommend that the proposed ordinance and light fix are exempt from the CEQA Act, and with that, I'll request a reading of the title of the ordinance.
Yes, thank you. This is ordinance number 2004, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Camarillo, California, amending the Camarillo Municipal Code chapters 19.12, 19.14, 19.16, 19.18, 19.21, 19.22, 19.23, 19.24, 19.25, 19.26, 19.27, 19.28, 19.30, 19.32, and 19.44 to indicate that exterior lighting is permitted subject to the procedures and regulations in accordance with the proposed addition of Chapter 19.47 Lighting Regulations. Thank you.
I'll move to waive any further reading if there is any, and adopt the resolution.
Second. With a comment, if I might?
Please.
Again, I'm really appreciative, Joe, of all of the time that community development has spent on this ordinance, together with the consultant and legal staff. I think this is a very welcome ordinance, particularly from a health and environmental standpoint, which Dr. Dixon can articulate a lot better than I can. But I want to assure, during my time on the council, this has happened not just in one area of the city. I've also had it happen, for example, in the Montelenas, where there's been light coming up from the commercial area on Tecate in that area. It's also happened in other instances. So it's become an issue that I think it's very timely that we're dealing with. So it's not just the one instance here. I can think of a number of occasions where this has occurred. So with that, I've already seconded it and fully support it. And thank you.
I'm just going to throw my serious comment in. I do really appreciate what you shared with us tonight, and I agree with what Mr. Tremblay said. So with that, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. So that brings us down to oral communications.
The lighting
And-
fixture guide.
I'm going to start on this side tonight. Mr. Tennyson.
I'll make it short and sweet. I have nothing to report.
I have nothing to report other than happy Martin Luther King Day on Monday. Thank you for all who continue to work for fairness and justice in our world. Thank you so much.
Mr. Tremblay.
Oh dear, I've got a few things to say. Okay. Is that okay? Can I go first, Kev? All right, so, gee, I feel like I'm out on the limb, especially given the brief nature of the comments from other council members. But meetings attended since December 14, December 16th, the City Employee Appreciation Dinner, and I again want to express my appreciation to those at the city, our city employees who made that happen. It was a wonderful occasion. December 19th, I had a tour of the Camarillo train station and a meeting with Assemblymember Irwin. We were talking about transportation-related issues, and then on last Friday, January 6th, I chaired my last Ventura County Transportation Commission board meeting as chair. A new chair, Brian McDonald, comes in next month. At the VCTC meeting, we had a number of presentations, which I won't go through with you tonight, but one of them was from the Chief Financial Officer of Caltrans, who is talking about the status of future state transportation revenues, and the state is seriously looking at going toward a road charge type formula for vehicles on the road, and I can always to replace how registration fees are currently done, and I won't go into it at length, but it was a very good presentation, and perhaps sometime it would be worthwhile looking at that here. And a presentation on regional broadband infrastructure, and then finally on VCTC and Metrolink ridership. VCTC ridership continues to be better, probably around the high 50 percentile compared to pre-pandemic, and Metrolink ridership continues to be suffering, probably about the mid 40%. But all that said, what I really wanted to just chat about a little bit tonight is the good news, what I will call the good news and the bad news on the water supply front. The good news is our city's groundwater desalter is now in operation, and that is terrific news, and it's finally in operation. I know we had to surmount some things to get to that point, but kudos to everyone who has had a hand, former council members, current council members, staff, consultants, everyone who's had a hand, and contractors who has had a hand in getting this project to operational reality. In the long term, contextually, our groundwater desalter is going to provide about 40% to 50% of this city's water supply, with the balance from our deep groundwater wells and about 15 to 20% imported water, and that's a significant, I apologize, you've heard me talk about this before. It's important to emphasize that because it cuts down, it increases our resiliency. From a cost standpoint, it's also good, and it decreases our reliance on state imported water. That said, the city is still reliant, to an extent, on state-imported water, and ergo, the city is still, and its residents and ratepayers are still subject to restrictions from the Metropolitan Water District and from Cayugas Municipal Water District. That's the good news. But I want to talk a little bit tonight about the other side of the coin, and I'm going to label it missed opportunities. It's January 11 today. We're still in the middle of the December through March hydrologic cycle where we get most of our rain. So we're going to see what happens the rest of this month. We've got a storm coming in on Saturday, I think, or on the weekend, and that's good. And we'll see what happens in February and March. But the drought is still here. So we had Department of Water Resources, for example, announcing in early December only a 5% state water project entitlement. That may change, but we don't know yet. And we on this dais are going to be talking about this issue extensively in the next 60 to 90 days, because wait until we get to April and May. What will the restrictions, if any, I want to say if any, but what will the restrictions look like from Cayugas and Metropolitan Water District? That's the demand side, okay? And we all went, our economics classes, we have both supply and demand. And on the demand side, our city, our total supply, if you look at our urban water management plan, is around, I'm looking at it, Mr. Klotzel, probably around 7,500 to 8,000 acre feet per year in terms of the demand side. Now, Cayugas, from whom our city, together with 18 other retailers, gets its state-imported water, Cayugas on average imports about 80,000, maybe up to 90,000 acre feet. And that's about it could be in about 70,000 acre feet. Well, there's another side, that's the demand side, but there's another side that no one is addressing, and that's the supply side. And I've been thinking about it a lot in the context of the epic storms that have been going on. Why is the supply side relevant to Camarillo? Well, it's because on the council and staff, we have to keep our eyes on the big picture because it affects our residents and affects our ratepayers who are still subject to Metropolitan Water District and Cayugas drought restrictions, even though we have our city desalter in operation. I know I sound like a broken record. Since last April or May, I have been outspoken about the state's about some of the failures of Metropolitan Water District, but about the state's, and I label it an abject failure, to increase our water supply by creating new surface water storage facilities, including surface reservoirs and stormwater percolation structures. Remember, 9 years ago, the state voters adopted $2.7 million in bonds to do, at that time, what was projected to be 8 surface storage projects. How many have been done? Zero. It's not, there's been no discernible progress in the last 8 to 9 years. And my comments tonight are really focused on the state. Met has its own issues, but that's another discussion. So now go to what's been going on in the last several days. Go on to our recent storms. The atmospheric river that's hitting us. And so let's focus on flooding. And I lived in Davis for 9 years. Right now, in the Yolo Basin, Sacramento River bypass flood flows near Davis, the Department of Water Resources streamflow projections as of the 10th, as of yesterday, were well in excess of 100,000 acre feet per day. In fact, it's much higher than that, but I'm using that as a very, very overly conservative figure. So the rainfall volume has been epic. A substantial portion of that water is legitimately needed for environmental and wetlands and habitat purposes. And there are regulations and wildlife, and there are regulations on this, and they're called the first flush regulations. But remember that on the average in the state, 50% of the water goes to environmental, 40% to ag, and 10%, only 10% goes to urban, with half of that for indoor and half of that for outdoor irrigation. So you have these first flush regulations, and what that does is at the pumps, going down to before it would come over the grapevine, there are regulations that restrict the state water project pumping to prevent reverse flows. But that said, in my view, there should be more water made available for state water project pumping, and there is discussion going on as, well, wait a minute, we have these flushing regulations, they're salutary, they serve a purpose, but are they outdated in light of new climate change science, in new climate science? And there's there is some real concern that, wait a minute, we've got these flood circumstances, and we need to take that into account to capture some of this water. What happens to that water going out the bypass? Unless it perks, it's going out to the delta, and it's going out to the ocean, and it's lost. It's wasted. To me, that makes no sense. Then, at the State Water Project pumping plant, you have, like in the Clifton Court, the pumping right now is at 2,700 acre feet a day. Contrast that with 100 to 150,000 acre feet going out to the ocean. So my question is, where's the balance? And more to the point politically, where does the interests of the urban residents of this state, who account for about 10% of the average total water use, how are our interests protected? So here's the context. 1 day of water flowing out to the ocean through the Yolo bypass is about 20% more than the Callegas annual import demand. Wrap your head around that. And that's just Callegas. And that's just the Yolo bypass. That's none of the other floodways in the state. So I think of the last several days, and I think of it in terms of it's a supply issue as well as a demand issue. We have to continue looking at the big picture. I think the last several days has been a missed opportunity, and thank you for the chance to editorialize. I think we need to continue to ask hard questions and to advocate for our residents. And here's what's going to come up. Keep this in context, because we're going to be asked by residents in the spring, well, isn't the drought gone because of these rains? That's question number one. And question number two is, well, if that's the case, why are there continuing drought restrictions on urban users in Southern California? It's because these issues have not been addressed at the state level. So thank you for listening. That concludes my council comments for tonight, and go from there. Thank you.
Mr. Kildee?
It's always interesting following Mr. Tremblay. Meetings attended. I attended a December 15th VRSD meeting. I, too, was going to bring up that the good news is that the desalter is up and running. Kudos to everybody that had a part in that. It looks like the city of Camarillo has fared pretty well with the rainstorm, so I don't think we need to have any update, but so far so good with the rainstorms. I want to thank staff. When I was driving around the city, I saw a lot of city vehicles checking things out, and I appreciate if you could pass that along, Dave, to your employees with that. And that's really all I have right now, so that's all I have.
Okay, for meetings attended, I was also at the Employee Appreciation Dinner, and once again, thank you, staff. And on January 6th, I attended the City Selection Committee. I won't mention the desalter since it's been mentioned, but yay. And Martin Luther King Day is on Monday. What day is today? It is Monday, so in remembrance of him. And then I personally wanted to thank my appointed planning commissioner, Beverly Vandermeulen, who was reappointed, but I failed to mention her earlier in the meeting, so I wanted to thank her for her service and for her agreeing to serve for another term. So with that, we are going to recess to finish our closed session, and we will be back at 7 p.m. Okay, we are reconvening the city council meeting, and let the record reflect that all council members are present. Now is the time for public comments. I have one comment card. I see another one coming. So I'll call your name in the order I have received them. Our first speaker will be John Kraljic. Okay, when you come to the podium, please state your name. You have 3 minutes. You'll see the timer. I can see one, and you can see one. When it turns to 2 minutes, it'll turn yellow and beep, but you can keep talking till 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. My name is John Kraljic. I'm a resident and homeowner in Old Town, and I'm just looking for some resolution on some information on our residential streets there. They're due for repaving or complete redo. I'm not sure. They're in the design and construction phase, due to be complete spring this year. And I've made a phone call and email asking if they're going to do a complete resurface tear down or just another repave, because the crown in the street is non-existent, which, doesn't help with the water flow. The curbs in some areas are 1 to 2 inches in height because of all the additional asphalt that's been placed on there year to year. And I've been told by a gentleman who came down for another trouble call we had with water there, that the infrastructure underneath the street is asbestos concrete, which may need replacement due to its lifespan. So I'm just looking for resolution exactly what I hope it's going to be a tear down, or I've been trying to get an answer on when and what they're going to be doing to those streets in Old Town, because they're in bad repair right now. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And our second speaker is Scott Kujaroka. Did I say it right?
Yes, you did.
Oh, good.
Yes, thank you. I'm here to request a building owner the city permit to install my own solar system onto my personal residence. So let me give an excerpt to the letter that I addressed to Tom Juzwiak, and I have not gotten a response back from him. It says, I came in yesterday requesting a city permit for the installation of a solar system onto my personal residence. I was told the city of Camarillo no longer routinely issues permits for solar systems installed by building owners. We were given a page from the California Electrical Code. In Article 690, it states that for a solar PV system, the installation of equipment and all associated wiring and interconnections shall be performed only by qualified personnel as defined in Article 100. I looked up Article 100, and the definition of qualified person is one who has skills and knowledge related to the construction of electrical equipment. It was a lot more extensive, so I'm just going to paraphrase. And so what it is that I also provided a plan in order to be able to install it. And so what it is that I have a friend. So we're both retired electrical engineers from the base at Point Mugu, and he has installed 12 systems already with city permit, 3 of them in the city of Camarillo. And so I was wondering, what is it going to take, and what is the criterion in order for me to say, well, am I forced to go to a solar installer? Am I forced to go to a general contractor? Why can't I use somebody who's been qualified, who has installed 12 systems in the Ventura County, and mostly, and all of them have been city permitted, and so forth. So I would just like to know, I've tried to get in contact with Tom, and I have not gotten a response back. So I would like to know, what is it going to take for me to be able to get a city permit in order to do that? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Mayor,
Yes.
we'd be happy, staff be happy to meet with these folks
Yes.
After the meeting and
That's
get
what I was-
information
Good.
for both speakers. Correct.
That's what I was going to suggest, so thank you. We're not really allowed to reply publicly, but we will have staff follow up with both of you, and we thank you for coming tonight. And unless we have anything else, I think that concludes our business, so we are adjourned until our next meeting. Oh, stand by. Oh, yes, closed session report, sorry.
There was no reportable action taken in closed session. Thank you.
And with that, we will adjourn. Good night, everybody.